Hi, my name's Thete, and in this video we're going to be discussing the Hedonites of Slaanesh, the new mortal units that have just become available for pre-order today. First of all though, so I've been talking about setting up the new studio, we're in it again, and it's come on a little bit, didn't have that much time in the last week. One thing that should hopefully be a little bit better is the sound. It was pretty shocking in last week's video. Not really done anything with the studio, and the studio is quite harsh in terms of hard surfaces, so I need to soften those up a little bit. I don't know at what point I'll make headway on that, but hopefully the sound is a little better at the moment. But anyway, there's going to be several more videos this week, and in one of them I'll hopefully get a bit more done and then give you a little show around. You can maybe see a few photos at the moment, but it is still very much work in progress. But the Hedonites of Slaanesh mortal units. Now I'm going to start off of the models that have been brought out for pre-order today. One of them we sort of already had, the Lord of Pain, and I've got the War Scrolls out. One of the benefits of Age of Sigmar is the War Scrolls themselves are freely available. They're not always up to date on the site, but they are freely available. So of course, as soon as the models came out for pre-order, we've been able to actually have a look at what the rules are, not the points values, although the Lord of Pain we sort of know. When he came out with the Shadow and Pain set, which is somewhere, I wasn't that impressed with it, because at the time, of course, he'd come out, he came in a box of Hedonites of Slaanesh demons. He's immortal, and okay, you know, is that really a big problem? Maybe not, but at the same time, the mortal units in a Slaanesh army or Hedonites of Slaanesh army are mounted. Now, of course, you can bring in Slaves to Darkness with Mark of Slaanesh in there, no problem at all. You may well want to bring in, some say, Chaos Warriors or Marauders to occupy an objective, but then you don't want a Lord of Pain there, do you? So, whereas if you brought in something like Varangard, again, he's not going to keep up with those. But now, of course, we've got some Hedonites, specifically Hedonites of Slaanesh mortal units, and they're actually quite tasty. There's one I'm not sure about. I'm going to start off with that one, if I can find him, and it is, of course, Glutos. Now, a couple of interesting things here. First off the bat, I'm going to point out, so large model, 18 wounds. I've got a couple of issues with it, though, where I'm not really sure, and then there's a couple of things about him that are actually look pretty decent. So the couple of things I'm not so sure about, first of all. One is a bit like Catacross in that not only does his profile degrade with damage, which is standard for like big old, you know, monster type things like this, although I'll come to the monster bit in a minute. It's the fact that they have an entourage, and as their profile decays, they lose members of that entourage. Now that in itself, in theory, is fine. The problem is though, like what's supposed to happen is when you're looking at their profile stats and you go, oh right, I've taken 5 wounds, so I've got these left alive. The problem with that is you're then thinking to yourself, so what abilities have I lost? Because each member of this entourage brings with it special abilities. For example, the first one to go is Delise. One thing that she brings in, a little bit like Lord of Pain, who gets the ability to ignore wounds and mortal wounds and a 5 up there. Basically, there's some disgustingly resilient going on in this Hedonites of Slaanesh. She grants that ability to Glutos, but it's not a given. So in the hero phase, you roll a d6. If it's a 1, you don't get it, but on the 2+, you get it. And it does last until the next hero phase. So even if he's degraded, you lose Delise, well, you still have that ability until the start of the next hero phase. The problem is, though, you look at this and you say, okay, you've got these companions. I've suffered 5 wounds, so that means I've got Painbringer Kiazu left and Lashmaster Visk, odd demon name. And I look at that and I think, right, so what ability? So now I've got to read which abilities Delise brings. I've got to read the whole mess again. Obviously, in reality, what I would do is produce one of my cheat sheets. But if you're trying to rely upon the resources that Games Workshop give you, hang on, could you just hang on a minute while I just work out what abilities I've still got and which ones I've lost. So it's not I don't think these sort of mechanics should exist because of that, but it is nonetheless a downside. It's extra admin, which I'm never in favour of extra admin. The second thing I'm not so sure about is his spell casting abilities, because he's like a double wizard. He can cast 2 spells. He gets his spell from the pleasure and pain. And the other thing he gets abilities each battle round, which are cumulative. And in battle round 4, it looks pretty tasty when you read it. So battle round 4, at the end of your hero phase, you can replace. The only problem is it says at the end of the hero phase. You're only going to get this for battle round 5 by the looks of it. At the end of your hero phase, you can replace the spell this model knows from the Law of Pain and Pleasure table with a new spell from that table. So you look at that and you think, well, that's only for the very last turn. But, you know, better than nothing. You know, if you chose a spell that's useful from a bit more of a range or more of a buffing thing, and now you're thinking, well, in battle round 5, actually that spell's not that useful, but this spell would be really good. Okay, but you are only getting it for that one. And in battle round 5, unless it's a very tight game, of course, you're not going to make the difference there. But then it says, in addition, this model can attempt to cast 1 extra spell in your hero phase. So that'll be 3 spells. And that would be in battle round 4 as well, because it doesn't say from the end of battle round 4 for that. And you look at that and you think, well, that's straight up good, isn't it? It cast an extra spell. The downside is, for me, so you've got your spell from the Pleasure and Pain Law. Well, you do not, I don't know what they look like yet. Got to wait another week or so. And you've got Arcane Bolt, you've got Mystic Shield. Well, I mean, you can always cast those. Whether it's all that useful is another matter. And then you've got his own ability. Now, his own spell is Crippling Famishment. Now, in some situations, I think it could be useful, but the problem with this is I think it's less useful later on. So, Crippling Famishment, casting value of 7. If successfully cast, pick 1 enemy unit within 18 inches of the caster that's visible to them. Until your next hero phase, halve the movement, halve the run rolls, and halve their charge rolls. In battle round 4 and 5, that may be useful. It's probably much less likely to be useful, though, if we're honest. You know, I suppose you could be a bit cheeky, and if it's one of these where your opponent's trying to make a mad dash for an objective for the last turn, like you know, then you could go, I'm going to stop you reaching it. But apart from those situations, I think that spell is probably, again, not always, but probably in most situations, not that useful to cast, which will leave you with his spell, Arcane Bolt and Mystic Shield. And if his spell was useful in the first few battle rounds, but not so much in the 4th, and you can't change it till the end of the 4th, you could easily be getting that ability in battle round 4 and going, oh, I can't use it. So it's one of those, objectively it's good to be able to cast another spell, it might not actually be useful. So those are the 2 things I'm not sure about, but there are useful things as well. The first is, and I don't know whether this is a mistake or not, it comes to the monster thing. He's not a monster. He's not got the monster in his keyword, which means he's a big old model. He's a big old ostentatious model. He's got 18 wounds, but you stick him next to like a few things, and you -1 to hit him with the lookout save rule. Now, so that may be FAQ'd. I'm not sure that's supposed to be deliberate. And I did keep trying to rack my brains. Did they FAQ the lookout save rolls? Because I'm going to look pretty silly here because it's so long now since I've played a game of Age of Sigmar that I'm thinking, or it's a few months at any rate, I'm thinking, did they change the rule? And I've forgotten about it. It doesn't actually matter that it's a monster or not, and it's based on wounds, and I mix it with 40k. But yeah, so I don't think so. So that's an odd one, but it's still odd that he wouldn't be a monster anyway. Which also means that any units that get special abilities against monsters, they're going to come up against, that's a monster. I get this special ability, I'm not a monster. What? You got 18 wounds. You're a big old fat Slaaneshi like general. Yeah, I'm not a monster. I'm just misunderstood. So that, you know, on the face of it is quite good. The other thing is he's quite good at buffing units. So again, he gets these cumulative abilities each battle round. The first one, add 1 to bravery of mortal Hedonite units within 6 inches. So that's not wholly within 6, just within 6. Then, you know, well, he gets a personal one battle round 2, can run and still charge later in the same turn, fine. Battle round 3, don't take battle shock test for mortal Hedonite units while they're, this time it does have to be wholly within, but 12 inches. And I'm glad it said mortal there, because you don't want to inflict that on your demonettes. Although I suppose you just keep one demonette slightly out of your 12 inches, wouldn't you? But that's quite useful as well, just straight up no battle shock test for anyone that clusters around him. And you would want, I mean, if you take him, you're taking him with a mindset of clustering units around him. anyway, because of the buffs he gives. And the other thing is, well, there's a bit of a Healy command ability as well, which may be useful. So you can use this command ability once per turn your hero phase. If you do so, pick one friendly Hedonite unit, so it doesn't have to be a mortal unit, but it could be him. It's probably most usefully used on him, or maybe Sigvald later on. And so if you kill something, like you destroy the unit and there's wounds still to be allocated, well, those excess wounds can go on to healing onto that unit. So you could use it on himself, or you could use it on another unit where if you think it's going to be a bit of an overkill situation, they could get some healing out of it. Say, as I say, on Sigvald. So there are a couple of good things in there. For me, I'd look at it and I'd think, what's the points value going to be? For something like this, you typically talk about 400 or 500 points, don't you? At which point I'm looking at it and thinking, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about him, but we'll see. Now, in terms of other things, now, before I go into the other characters, I'll look at the ranged options, because now Slaanesh get ranged options. So you've got your Blissbarb Archers and your Blissbarb Seekers, which are basically Blissbarb Archers, but on Seekers, only a little bit more potent, really. So the standard archers are reasonable archers. If you look at all, there's not that many shooting units in the game. Obviously, we're going to ignore Kharadron Overlords at the moment. They're okay. They've got an 18-inch range on their bow, 2 attacks with their bow, hitting on 4s, wounding on 4s, which isn't amazing, but it's not terrible. -1 rend, 1 damage. So that's sort of okay. But, and this is an odd thing, it says, as long as you've got at least 11 models in the unit, or if you start off, if you're choosing to have at least 11 models in the unit, one of them becomes this Blissbrew Homunculus, and it's armed with a blade, so it can do some melee attacks, but it can't do any ranged attacks. But it gives +1 to wound on the ranged attacks for the unit. So, you know, you give yourself, we'll see how it works in the battle tone, but, you know, I'm planning on taking maybe a unit of 20 anyway. With archers, I think you want a decent number. And you have one of those, and you think, so that then becomes 4 to hit, but 3 to wound. Well, that's not bad. And you can also run and still shoot later in the turn, so 6-inch movement, so you get about a 9 or 10-inch move and then 18-inch range. So, you know, it's pretty good that you can hunt something down. A unit like this, of course, you're not going to want to charge into anything except in a niche situation. So so the fact that you can just freely run and do what you would do is pretty good. Then the Blissbarb Seeker, so a similar thing, except this time with their bow they get 3 attacks, but they don't get a Homunculus giving them +1 to wound, so it's just 4s to hit, 4s to wound, -1 rend. But an unmodified wound roll of a 6 means it does a mortal wound, although it's not a mortal wound in addition. There's a few units that on 6s to wound will do a mortal wound, but then it's on top of. With these ones it's not, it's just replacing it. But, you know, still, it does mean there's no save roll to be made. So, you know, they're both slightly different, but both still useful. And you look at that and you think, right, you can, you know, and I like archers and shooting options for a situation where there's an objective. It's sort of a bit out of the way, but you want to stay on it. You don't just want to capture it and move on, because your opponent will be able to come and sneak it with a fast flying unit, like a unit of, where are they, Harpies or something like that. Or Kinnerai now. So yeah, I like the idea that you can plonk something on objective that will be robust enough to at least stave off a small, tiny commando squad and still do something useful, in other words, shooting at something. So that's quite useful. Again, depends on the points cost of these. I don't know what that's going to be like. They have 1 wound each, the Blissbarb Archers, but the Blissbarb Seekers 4 wounds each. The point with the Blissbarb Archers with the 1 wound is the other infantry units have 2 wounds, so they're not designed to be like particularly robust, so hopefully the points won't be too bad, but I'll have to wait and see on that. In terms of the other character units first, and I like both of these. I cannot imagine not wanting to take both of these in an army. So, as I say, I'm not sure about Glutos, but these I am sure about. So the Shard Speaker of Slaanesh, which is their specific wizard hero. Very nice, just a 1, you know, cast wizard, but the cast they get is very decent. Now, it's all quite short range, these. You need to get these up close and personal. But their own spell is casting value of 6. If successfully cast, pick one enemy unit within 12 inches of the caster invisible. Subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks made by that unit in the following combat phase. Now, I like that because in terms of types of spell, you can have spells that do damage. They're okay. They're always useful if you can get in range of them. They're okay, but again, limited. You can get spells that buff one of your own units. Now, that can potentially do even more than like D6 mortal wound type spells. That can be really, really good, particularly in Hedonites of Slaanesh when you're going to expect a lot of attacks to go raining down. And particularly if Hedonites of Slaanesh keep the ability, which means that, 6s to hit explode, yeah, great. So there's going to be a lot of attacks. So anything that buffs that is really useful, and they do that in a moment, I'll get into it. But debuffing is really good because when you have a battle plan, you sort of rely, your opponent can look at that and go, well, your plan clearly depends upon this unit, so I'm just going to destroy that unit. Anything that allows your units to last a bit longer, I think is really good because it means you can get those synergies with those units that you may have. So -1 to wound on something that you identify as a big problem is really powerful. And then he also buffs as well because once per turn in your shooting phase, it says you can pick an enemy unit within 9 inches of the model. So again, you really need to be up close here. On a 3-up, then you're basically putting a tracer on them. Add +1 to wound to any attacks against that unit. So, if you do it on the same unit, you can be saying, right, this unit that's with me is going to charge into you, right? That's what they're going to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that you are, so those attacks are +1 to wound against you, but also I'm going to make it so that you, when you're attacking back, are going to be -1 to wound. And of course, by doing it in the shooting phase, you do it first. You might also be able to soften them up with some Bliss Barb Archer action as well. And then they get another slight thing. If they successfully cast a spell and it's not unbound, they get an extra special melee attack as well, which would actually make them a decent melee combat character. Not amazing, but decent. So again, you're encouraged to get them stuck in. Whether you would, I suppose, is another matter. It depends on what you're up against. And then Sigvald, Prince of Slaanesh. Oh, he's interesting. So he's purely a combat character. He doesn't buff anyone, really. He doesn't do anything like that. He's fairly nippy, 6-inch movement, but he gets +3 on the charge. And so that's really good. But now his sword, the other thing is if he charges that turn, he will fight first. So that basically means it's your turn, you've charged him in, he can fight first, then you still get to pick another unit to go first before it alternates. But his sword is 2s to hit, 3s to wound, -2 rend, D3 damage. Now in terms of number of attacks, it's a bit variable. It's always going to be at least 5. But if he's charged, if he charges in, then the number of attacks is equal to the result of his charge. And if that's less than 5, then it becomes 5. It's whichever's highest, 5 or that number. And you can think to yourself, well, hang on a minute, hold on, because +3 anyway, so he's always guaranteed 5 on the charge. Well, no, it's unmodified charge roll, so it won't count his +3. Unmodified charge roll. But that's still an average of 7 attacks in a turn he charges and then going down to 5. So he's a bit of a beast. The other thing is, so he's a bit of a hypocrite actually, because if I go to his mirror shield first, so that gives him a 4-up ability to he's got a 3-up save, and then he can negate wounds and mortal wounds on a 4-up. Unfortunately, he doesn't allow others to benefit either. So if you've got an ability like Disgustingly Resilient, you can ignore a wound or mortal wound on a 5-up, 6-up, whatever it is, 4-up like him, not against his attacks. You don't get to negate his attacks. You can have your save at -2 rend and that's it. So he's a bit cheeky. He's a little bit cheeky. But again, if you look at it, he's one of these characters that'll be a bit like Light of Eltharion, I think. I think he'll be decent for his points. Again, deliver him safely into combat. You've got to deliver him safely into combat. Now, if you did have Glutos as well, of course, Glutos's command ability could be very useful for him in terms of overkill damage turning back into wounds healed, because he's got 6 wounds. If you can, top those up with that ability, that would be handy. So those, yeah, and then the Lord of Pain, we'd already known about. Now that they can be in amongst Hedonites of Slaanesh mortal units, infantry units more specifically, then they will be worth bringing as well, potentially. In terms of other things, so the mortal close combat infantry units, so you've got Murmur Painbringers. Now these are quite solid. You've got 2 wounds each, 4 up save, and they can re-roll saves against melee attacks. So again, you want to get them straight into melee, but you haven't got any ranged attacks anyway, so of course you'd want to do that. So get them in with all haste. Unmodified wound rolls to them will do a mortal wound in addition to normal damage. Excuse me, what's going? So in terms of combat, they're not bad. 2 attacks each, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, -1 rend, 1 damage. So that's decent elite-ish type infantry unit. And, you know, 6s to wound, do a mortal wound as well as everything else. And if the Hedonites of Slaanesh rule, say, largely as they were last year and or the year before, and it's 6s to hit also do extra attacks. And I don't know whether that's the case or not, because I don't get the battle tome for another week, sorry. Then, you know, they're going to be very, very decent indeed. Again, always is going to depend on the points. As soon as I know the points values for these, I shall be doing some number crunching and having a look at how effective they are. But they sound very, very decent indeed. Then the other one that will go with them, the Painbringers Twin Souls. Now, first thing I'm going to say on this is, a lot of units have a champion option. Most, in fact, have a champion option. They really should have just called them champions. And I think this is the reason why. The champion for a Painbringers Twin Souls unit is called an Ego Pomp. I think this is the point we've reached where Games Workshop are struggling for ideas for names of champions. But anyway, in terms of them, so they also get a 4 up save and 2 wounds. They don't get to re-roll those saves. However, they get an ability. Now, in terms of their attacks, by the way, it's not that impressive. They get 3 attacks. I mean, that's decent enough. Hitting on 4s, wounding on 3s, no rend, 2 damage. So overall, it'll work out reasonable, particularly against lightly armoured units. But at the start of your hero phase, now it says you must pick one of the following abilities until your next hero phase, and you have to pick a different ability each battle round, but there's only 2 abilities, so what it really means is you have to alternate them. But that's fine, because in battle round 1, you will pick the one that makes them a bit like a Lord of Pain in that they've got Disgusting and Resilient, basically. They can ignore wounds and mortal wounds on a 5 up. So it's 4 up save, and then a 5 up to ignore. You would of course do that in the first battle round under almost all circumstances, because you would not expect to be able to deliver them into combat. Unless there's some sneaky little spells or abilities in the Hedonites of Slaanesh battle tome, I cannot imagine them being delivered in the first battle round. So of course they can't do any damage, they can only take damage, so of course you'd give them the defensive one. Then in battle round 2, when you'd hope to get them into combat with something, you could give them the second ability, which is re-roll hits for attacks made with melee weapons by this unit. So from a 4 up, so a 50-50 chance to hit, to a 3/4 chance to hit. And again, if 6s to hit explode, if that rule remains in place, then that could be very decent indeed. So I'll look at these units, and I've not quite finished yet. There's another one to talk about. But I sort of look at these units and I think, I don't think it would be sensible to try and get all of these into one army, but you look at them and you think, I would quite like it. It'd be really nice. But it would lack focus. I think you would want a focus, but certainly I should be getting all of these units. I have actually commissioned someone to do them. It'll be a long time before I get them, but that's fine. There's plenty to do in between. And at the moment I can't even play anyway until this lockdown is over. So then the final 2, so as well as the Bliss Barb Seekers, you've got your Slick Blade Seekers, which are purely melee, and these are way better than the versions that existed in the current Hedonites of Slaanesh battle tome. So these are, they have a glaive, 3 attacks, hitting on 3s, wounding on 3s, -1 rend, 1 damage. Unmodified wound roll, inflicts a mortal wound in addition again. So it's another one in addition. They can re-roll the charges, 14-inch movement, and get to re-roll the charge. They're going straight into something. So, yes, and then the final one is the Slangor Fiend Bloods, which are a bit beefier than I anticipated, although I suppose if I looked at the model carefully I could tell. Because they have 3 wounds. Now, they've only got a 5 up save, but 3 wounds. And 3 attacks, I mean, they've got 2 types of attack. They've got 3 attacks with their claws, hitting on 4s, wounding on 3s, -1 rend, 1 damage. Gilded weapon, 2 attacks, 4s, 3s, -1 rend, 2 damage. If you made a charge move, you get to add +1 attacks to those characteristics. You know, decent. It's like, you know, standard ogre type thing. So they're again okay for rushing into something, and then they get a sort of Blood Sisters type attack. So at the end of the combat phase, pick one enemy unit within 3 inches and roll a die for each model in the unit. For each 4 up, that enemy unit suffers a mortal wound. So again, I mean, not quite as good as Blood Sisters because there's only 3 up, but still that sort of ability. So they could go in and do a job of damage. I'm not sure about those in terms of, again, depends on points, because you look at that and I think, well, would I want to just bring more of the Murmur Painbringers? I don't know. Again, it'll just depend on the points there. But all of those units look useful now. Because the reason why I've never, until now, looked at Hedonites of Slaanesh army is because I do like Slaanesh. It's my favourite, technically, Chaos God. And I did take Slaanesh, even to tournament, Slaanesh Chaos armies back in Fantasy Battle. But I just looked at Hedonites of Slaanesh. I don't think it was bad at all. It's just I looked at the way I naturally would play and go, I'll make a mess of this. If I try and make a list here, I will make an arse of it. Like I said, I keep wanting to do it anyway. But I think with some of these units now, I could look at it and think, yeah, I could do something with this. And still, I'm not necessarily saying pure mortals. I may still mix it in with some Slaanesh demons as well. But you've got much more options now. You're not having to look at it and thinking, because I was having to look at it and thinking, how can I supplement my Hedonites of Slaanesh, which are mostly demons, with some Slaves to Darkness with Mark of Slaanesh, but I wouldn't get the allegiance abilities really. Whereas now I could look at it, I might still take some Varangard to beef them out, but I'd be looking at it and thinking, yeah, I could, yeah, I like this. I like this a lot. So by the end of the year, I can certainly see myself having quite a few games with this. But those are my thoughts anyway, early on, before we get the points and before we get the battle tome. As I say, there'll be a few more videos over the coming week as well, where I'll show you a bit more of the studio, and hopefully I've made some more progress on it, but that's going to be slow going, I think. But until then, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and until next time, I'll see you later.